Hey fam, welcome to another episode of the Woman in Progress podcast. I'm so excited to bring this episode to you guys because I actually have another coach friend in the industry, Coach Jeremiah. He is the owner of Elevated Coaching Systems, which is a fitness and nutrition coaching company specializing in physique development for women. So I know a lot of you guys are going to like this one because a lot of us are trying to get snatched, build the glutes, lose body fat. And obviously, this is what we do here. But I feel like with you, Jeremiah, you have so much like very tangible knowledge and you really break it down in a simplified way. And that's kind of what I want to bring here today. So, with that being said, a lot of the women listening to my podcast, they want to recomp, they want to lose fat, they want to build muscle. So, if you want to just go ahead, introduce yourself a little bit, what even got you into what you're doing specifically, and we can kind of take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. First, again, thank you so much for having me here. It's an honor to be here. Really excited to chat about this. I love talking about body recomposition and really just all things training and nutrition. Yeah, I thought that your intro was great. I am the founder of Elevated Coaching Systems. So we are a team of 5 and we really work with typically like a little bit more advanced demographics, someone who's already like, hey, I'm in a pretty good place, but I kind of want to take my physique to the next level. So what got me into this, OGs? It actually started with a buddy of mine and I just thought it would be hilarious for us to do like a peck pop type thing in like a casual conversations. We just thought it would be hilarious to do that in high school. So started training consistently, just literally so we could do that. But then I kind of fell in love with training and nutrition. And honestly, through most of the rest of high school, college, it was really the only thing that I like enjoyed, really the only thing that I cared about. So always kind of figured the plan was to be a personal trainer of some type, but then kind of somehow online, which this was like I graduated high school in 2011. So there wasn't a lot of online coaching at the time. But again, I was like, in some way, shape, or form, I want to like figure out how to make that work. And then over time, it's kind of just gradually evolved into this. So I mean, I worked a ton in like a big box gym as a personal trainer from 2014 to 2018. Around 2017, kind of started building the online side of things, and then the end of 2018 transitioned to kind of fully online. And yeah, here we are. Just over time, what clients of mine who have been incredible clients have eventually transitioned to coaches on our team, and really like so proud of the team that we've been able to build. But yeah, that's just kind of how we ended up here.
That's awesome. I love how you guys it started with like the peck challenge. Like, got to make sure I look good for this challenge.
I wish I had a better story. It's just such a bro story.
Hey, we love it. But okay, cool. And I know you mainly work with, I followed your page for a long time. So, not to be a creeper,
Mhm.
but women who are, I've seen you say this a couple of times, like lean women trying to get leaner or more advanced women. Obviously, that doesn't just mean cutting, right? It means you're probably spending a good amount of time building, which I think a lot of women get mixed up. They think the only way to get leaner is just to cut, to cut, to cut, to cut.
Right.
And then you find yourself like stuck, kind of always chasing weight loss, but not really satisfied with your physique. But then you're too afraid to raise your calories. So then you're kind of stuck in this limbo space. So, what would you say, like, to someone who's kind of in that limbo space, one foot in, one foot out, but really wants to build that desired physique?
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. And so many people are stuck in that place. Like so many women we work with are stuck in that place where, hey, I've been dieting, and I haven't been able to get the physique I want. But I'm also afraid to like eat more calories. What if I gain body fat, etc. So I think one of the most important things to understand here when we're talking about body recomposition and as a whole, like changing your physique is that like from the perspective if you want a physique that looks leaner, right? If it's, hey, I don't look as lean as I want to, and I'm sick of dieting. I've been dieting for forever. But again, I'm scared because if I'm eating more, like what if I gain fat? Or like, why would I transition out of fat loss if I'm not as lean as I want to be? The most important thing to understand is that there are a couple different levers we can pull to change your body fat percentage, right? So when you're saying like, I want to look leaner, we're basically just saying, I want to change my body fat percentage. So within the variables that we can control, your body fat percentage is basically just a ratio of the amount of fat mass to muscle mass on your frame. Technically, it would be lean mass. So think like your like bones, things like that. But of course, we're not going to be like adding more bones to your body. So basically, we can control muscle mass, right? So it's the ratio of muscle mass relative to fat mass. So you can change your body fat percentage and look leaner by either A, decreasing the amount of fat mass we have relative to muscle mass, or B, increasing the amount of muscle mass we have relative to fat mass, right? So again, like if you want to look leaner, dieting isn't the only thing to do. If it's just, hey, we're eating at maintenance calories, we're fueling you well, you have more lifestyle flexibility, you can train harder. So again, you feel better in your sessions, you can recover better, and thus you are able to build more muscle. But hey, we're eating at maintenance, we're doing a good job kind of maintaining here. So we're maintaining body fat, but we build muscle. The ratio of muscle mass to fat mass will have improved. You'll have built more muscle, but have about the same amount of fat as before. So thus you will again look leaner. Your body fat percentage will be lower. So I think like at the surface level, that's a very, very important thing to understand. And that does hold a lot of people back. I could go deep, like pretty deep on this, but I will let you like kind of redirect it and what route you want from here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, my first thought is like, okay, um, and we both do a lot of the similar kind of work, but I'm kind of just like, I feel like what people are going to be asking is like,
Mhm.
okay, well then how do I know if I should cut? How do I know if I should build? And how do I know if I should maintain? Because I think that's also what a lot of people get stuck in. It's like, okay, well, I want to build muscle, but I'm sorry, I want to get leaner, but like looking at myself in the mirror, I feel like I need to lose fat. Like I feel
Yeah.
like I need to do that. So, is there any like, I guess, benchmarks or parameters that you could give someone for them to identify I'm best for maintaining or main gaining, as I like to call it, going into a straight build, going to a straight cut? Because I think obviously that'll depend on like body fat percentage, but I've also had clients with maybe higher body fat percentage and their body completely is like recomp through their training and like proper fueling. So how do you help people kind of identify what is the best next step for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, there are, of course, a couple variables that will impact this, but really, like when we're looking at body recomposition, again, kind of, hey, I'm getting leaner, I'm building muscle. As a whole, like my body fat percentage is improving. Um, I'd say there's really going to be three primary types where this will occur, right? So there's the first instance, which is going to be like traditionally what we think of when we think of like body recomposition, where, hey, I lost a lot of body fat and built a good amount of muscle at the same time. So this will be most common for someone who doesn't have a lot of muscle. And hey, maybe we're like average to like the slightly higher end of average as far as body fat goes, right? So in that instance, it's really going to be like a big, honestly, what I would say is like the biggest thing that will determine this is going to be like how new we are to a proper training stimulus, right? Because so much of this is going to be like how much muscle am I able to build in this process? Basically, like how new are we to that? So essentially, like how much muscle do I have? We could break it down to that. And then how lean are we currently? So again, like this first person, hey, we're not all that lean. It might not be like I have 30 pounds or 40, 50 pounds to go to like get to a weight that I would like feel good at, or like a body composition I would feel good at. But it might be like, okay, I can definitely tell like I'm a little bit fluffy and I really don't have a lot of muscle. In that instance, I typically would say, hey, if we haven't built a lot of muscle yet, we're probably pretty new to a proper hypertrophy training stimulus. So, and this is again, like it's so important to understand how important the training is for seeing changes like this, right? Because it's again that muscle. A lot of people, when it's like, hey, I haven't been able to get the physique I want despite constant dieting, for so many people, the problem is it's not that, hey, we need to get leaner, but you don't have enough muscle to support the shape you want, right? Where if we're talking about like getting more defined, again, like having more shape in whatever area, it's not just getting leaner. We also need to have a prerequisite amount of muscle underneath that to uncover to really like have the shape you want. So again, within this, I would, for like that first instance, it probably would be, hey, maybe we go with a more conservative deficit to where we're still going to be giving you enough fuel to push hard in your training to recover well. We're not focusing on losing like all that crazy quickly because the reality is you're probably capable of building a decent
Right.
amount of muscle at the same time. So weight will be increasing due to like weight gain via muscle mass. Now as a whole, we'll see the scale trending down, but it might not be quite as quick as you'd expect. Also, we'll be looking at things like changes in progress pictures, body measurements. The second scenario would be on the flip side, if you are someone who's already pretty lean, but still doesn't have a lot of muscle, right? So in that instance, and again, like I would say this is a much more common client avatar that we see. Again, it probably is that person who's been dieting for a very long time. And honestly, they're pretty good at getting lean, right? They're already probably very slim, relatively low body fat. But understand there, like again, if we don't have the prerequisite amount of muscle, it's probably like you losing like that last 3 to 5 pounds probably isn't going to get you the physique you want. It's going to just uncover a smaller version of what you already have. So in that instance, what I would do is probably hang out around maintenance, kind of like the upper end of maintenance, and really focus on fueling yourself well. So doing a good job like eating plenty of carbs, a decent bolus of protein pre-workout, post-workout. Again, we want to really focus on prioritizing that, even like intra-workout, if we have some carbs intra-workout in any case like that. And then again, the training and building muscle is going to be our primary focus here. So really from there, like if you just maintain that body fat percentage, or not that body fat percentage, but like that amount of body fat on your frame and build muscle, again, you'll see a lot of drastic body recomposition. Now, that said, like I don't think there's a need to, like when we talk about building phases, like building at maintenance versus building in a surplus, in this instance, you are, again, if we haven't built a lot of muscle, we can typically assume this person is new to like a proper hypertrophy training stimulus. You'll get a great response just at maintenance. I really don't think it's until someone gets very, very advanced, they've already built a lot of muscle, that we need like those couple extra percentage points we get from like actually being in a calorie surplus to build muscle and go through like a true building phase where we actually gain a little bit of body fat at the same time. So in that instance, like, hey, until we have a good like 6 to 12 months under our belt of very hard training, you'll build a lot of muscle, you'll have seen solid body recomposition. I would probably just do so at maintenance. And then the last instance where it would be like a true cut, where we are going a little bit more aggressively, let's say losing closer to like 0.7 to 1% of body weight per week would be like our average rate of loss there. There, I would probably aim for that if it's someone who already has a lot of muscle, right? And this is where we're probably not going to see a lot of recomposition in this case, because again, the more muscle we build, unfortunately, the more advanced we get, the harder it's going to be for us to continue to build muscle, but especially in a deficit. So honestly, in that instance, if it's like, I want to build more muscle, but I also feel like I need to get a little bit leaner first, hey, it doesn't make sense for us to necessarily try to spend too much time focusing on the body recomposition side of things. Like, we're just not going to build all that effectively in a deficit. So let's just get this fat loss phase done with ASAP. So I'd rather be a little bit more aggressive there. Now, of course, like this is all context dependent, but typically rather be a little bit more aggressive there. Get that phase done with ASAP, and then get back to a phase where, hey, maybe we do need to actually be in a surplus in order to build tissue most effectively. But then the other instance where I would probably aim for a little bit more aggressive rate of loss was if it was like, hey, man, just to be healthy, I need to lose like 40, 50 pounds, right? I need to lose greater than like 15, 20% of my total body weight to get there. In that instance, even if we don't have a lot of muscle, again, we'll still have plenty of fuel stored within our body in the form of body fat to use as fuel, right? And so thus, that person can also lose pretty quickly and still build a good amount of muscle because they're new to that training stimulus. Very, very long answer.
Oh, I love it.
But did that
Because I
make
know
sense?
everybody's 100%. Like, that's why I wanted to bring you on, because I feel like I talk to women every single day. And obviously, we educate, we support, but I feel like there's, it's just, it's very specific to the person. And not everybody is going to go through kind of the same in and out. So when it comes to body recomposition, changing your body composition in general, I do want to talk about training and
Okay.
recovery, because that's something I see a lot. And I say this all the time. I'm not sure if you agree, but the whole like nutrition's 80%, training's 20%, I don't necessarily agree with. I think it's like 100, 100. Like, your
Yeah.
nutrition's important. And obviously, like in a building phase, you don't have to have your protein as high as like in a cutting phase, and like those little nuanced changes.
Right.
But let's talk about training, because I feel like this is, for my audience at least, I don't think we realize like how like intense and strategic it needs to be. And obviously we want to use progressive overload, but I almost see like progressive overload blindness, where then you start to ego lift and you're like, oh, well, I'm training 6 days a week, 5 days a week. Like, why don't I look like I work out? And then you're like, oh, nutrition's 80%. And it's like, what would you say are, for someone listening who maybe they're in the gym right now, they
Yeah.
might be doing some program on an app. Maybe they're literally just getting into the gym. So changing up your demographic a little bit.
Okay. Okay.
Um, what are top three things that they need to know to have effective training that is actually going to breed the results that they want?
Okay.
Given that, let's say they're hitting their macros like throughout the week.
Yeah, yeah. No, and I fully agree. I think that and again, I think this is more prevalent in the online space, which is the majority of coaching nowadays, to my understanding. But it's all like 80, 90% nutrition. Well, yes, if we're just looking at fat loss,
Right.
nutrition is going to by far be the biggest driver. But most people want to actually change their body composition. They want to build muscle as well. And training is so very important. Like, yes, like fueling yourself while supporting your ability to recover with nutrition is important. But it's kind of like the nutrition is the fuel in the tank, your training is the gas pedal. Where, hey, if we're not actually pushing that gas pedal with the proper type of training, the proper stimulus, we're still not going to get anywhere. It doesn't matter how much fuel we put in the tank. So, yeah, training, I would say, is vastly underrated in this regard. Okay, so top three things basically someone who's brand new to the gym needs to know in order to build muscle, correct?
Yes,
Okay,
to make
okay.
it effective. Like they're in the gym, they're maybe switching up their workouts every week. They're trying to do progressive overload, but like they're like, what am I missing? Like what
Yeah.
am I missing here?
Okay. So I'd say the most important thing, the biggest thing that most people are missing is the training intensity. And especially after your first like couple months of the gym where it's almost like anything works, my body changes a little bit. After that, for us to continue to progress, we need to be training quite a lot harder than most people typically are. I would say like 1 to 2 clients in the entirety of my coaching career who have started and it's like, oh yeah, we're actually truly training hard enough. You're nailing this. It's incredibly rare. So the important thing to understand here is to actually stimulate muscle growth. We basically think of each set as a signal to build muscle. And we basically need to trigger the signal to be sent to your body that, hey, we need to grow and add new tissue here, right? And one of the biggest pieces of that is training close to failure, right? And really, it's kind of this theory of effective reps is like more formally what this is known as, where, hey, the closer we get to failure, the larger and more muscle fibers we fatigue until we get to all out failure, at which point like our body basically can't recruit any more muscle fibers. They're all fully fatigued. We can't like fully fatigue, but like as close as our body will let us take them, and we can't lift the weight anymore. Right now, basically what that does is that sends a signal to your body, hey, this was a very stressful event. We couldn't handle it. So for us to be able to survive this in the future, we actually need to grow like a bigger, stronger muscle in order to be able to better handle this in the future. It's quite a bit more complex than that, but like at the simplest level, that's how we break it down. So the thing is, if we're not getting it within like I typically like to say like, because people typically underestimate how or overestimate how hard they're training. I typically like to say like 1 to 2, but really I would say like 2 to 3 reps shy of fail, like true to the point where I absolutely couldn't lift this weight with decent technique again. If we're not getting again within at least a couple reps of that very consistently in our training, we'll go in, we'll do a lot of work, but it'll feel like, hey, I'm really not seeing any results from all the work that I'm putting in. So again, for most people, that's, I would say by far the biggest challenge is, hey, we're just not pushing close enough to failure to actually stimulate more growth here. And then like it's pretty cool to see with a client, like you mentioned, someone training like 6 days a week and like I'm still not seeing progress. It's pretty cool to see, hey, we can pull someone down to 4 days a week. Maybe they were doing like 4, 5, 6 sets of each movement, and we can pull that down to like 2 sets. And
Yeah.
if we're just training harder, we can get so much more out of that, so much quicker progress. And realistically, like if you're able to do like 5, 6 sets per movement, I would also probably question like, are we really pushing this hard enough? Because that should be pretty damn hard to do, especially if you're able to like each set I can do the same weight for the same reps. I would probably like take a moment to consider like how hard am I pushing this, and maybe even record your sets. But that basically the intensity would be the first thing that I would focus on there. I would also then focus on what's the limiting factor, right? Again, if you're someone brand new to the gym and the goal is to build muscle, what's the limiting factor that's causing you to stop the set? And we want that to be whatever tissue or tissues we're trying to grow. So, for example, this doesn't have to be all that hyper specific, but for example, let's say that your goal is to build your quads, but you are doing like a walking lunge. And the thing that causes you to stop a set isn't like, wow, there's so much tension and fatigue in my quads. My quads are so tired that literally like they're about to give out if I do more than 1 to 2 more reps. Let's say that the limiting factor is instead like my balance. I'm falling from side to side, for example. We could maybe improve the execution of that, or maybe we could maybe like choose a more stable movement that would make it easier to keep that limiting factor. But again, that applies to a lot of things, even like a barbell back squat, for example. Not a bad movement by any means, but for a lot of people, like, what's the goal of this movement? Is it to grow quads, glutes? And is that the limiting factor in this? For a lot of people, it'll be like, well, my hips are shifting, or like my butt starts shooting up, my back starts to hurt, my bracing's giving out, it really just hurts my neck, whatever it may be. And that's why we're stopping the set. Or even like I'm doing too high reps, my cardio system's gassed, and that's what's causing me to stop the set, rather than, again, like fatigue and tension and stress in that tissue that we're trying to grow. So again, like considering what the limiting factor there is a huge thing as well. I would say, again, like the most common ones are going to be balance. Again, not like a walking lunge is bad by any means, still a great movement. But for some people, like I'm super uncoordinated, I really struggle to do like a walking lunge, and for it to not be my balance that is the limiting factor there.
Time
Or
to
grip
build
is
that
another.
coordination.
I know. Maybe that's what I need to work on next year. I got to get jacked first, and then I'll focus on something else. But balance is a very common one. Grip's another super common one on like an RDL, right? Where, hey, if the goal for this is to grow your glutes or your hamstrings, the reality is your glutes and hamstrings, especially your glutes, going to be like your biggest muscle in your body, should probably be stronger than your grip muscles. Thus, if we're not using something like wrist straps on a Romanian deadlift, your grip's always going to give out before your glutes do. So that will be the limiting factor, not your glutes, and we probably won't see great gains from that. So like something like wrist straps is a great idea. Even like taking too short of rest periods, it's a very common one where, and that's again, like if it's like typically like on a compound movement, if we don't feel like we need to rest at least like 2 to 3 movements for like a hack squat or leg press, you might be in really, really good cardiovascular shape. But for most people, it's like, hey, we might not be pushing this quite hard enough. But again, if it's like, hey, I'm only resting 60 seconds between sets, or I'm doing like I'm jumping around or jump roping or something like that between sets. And again, it's my cardio system is the thing that causes me to stop, not this specific tissue that I'm trying to grow. That would be another big barrier there. Those would be my first two. And that would really be, I mean, I think really like even just within those two, that would be the biggest thing.
And I like that because I think it simplifies it for those listening that are like, what the fuck? Like, I have so much to go back to the drawing board and
Yeah,
like change and whatever. And I see you thinking on a third one, but before you go to the third one, I do just want to say, like, for those listening, this is a perfect top two to start looking at with your training, because I do see this a lot with the women that come to me, and I'm sure you as well, like junk volume in their training, and 10 exercises, 8 exercises, 7 glute exercises, 4 sets of 12. And I'm like, there's no fucking way you're training quality reps, because I'll do 3 to 4 movements and I'm gassed. I'm like, okay, I crushed that lift. So I'll
right.
get some clients too. They're like, oh, only, 5 workouts, like only 3 sets. Like, isn't this going to be too easy? And I'm like, no, no, no. This is where we learn how to actually train quality. And that's what it's all about. Fuck the bullshit. Put the junk away. Let's focus on quality. That's how your booty's going to grow. So
Absolutely.
see you thinking on a third one. I'm not sure if there's anything you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, no, I think the third would be to just keep a training log, right? Tracking your weights
Yes.
lifted, reps performed. Actually, I take that back. Well, we're gonna make these one, because there's actually, I would say there's 4 that I want to say there.
Okay.
Track the weight lifted, reps performed very consistently, and don't change your training up extremely frequently, right? It can be like it's an interesting thing. I'm sure you probably have this conversation with like new clients as well, where it might be like well, hey, if I don't change my training up every like 3 to 4 weeks, I get bored with it. So can we do that? And then it's like, okay, so if you're stoked on how the training has been working for you so far, why are we here, right? Like, we also just expressed that you were frustrated and annoyed with the fact that you're always training, we're always in the gym, and we feel like we're not able to see results. And again, a big part of that for most people is changing training up too frequently. I'm going to bring this back to like the training log thing in just a second as well. So this is really going to work together well as one point, I promise. But if we're changing, the thing to understand is like anytime we start a new movement, and this will depend on how complex and skill heavy the movement is, but there's a period of time where we're mostly making neurological adaptations before we actually start to build muscle. So basically, think our body is just figuring out the skill of the movement before we actually get good enough at it to build new muscle tissue, right? So kind of think of it like when you're first learning how to ride a bike. like the first time you get on the bike and it's like you're just falling over and shit like that, and it's really hard to do. And then like we practiced a couple times. Then like, okay, my third try, I can actually ride my bike. You didn't go from like not being able to ride the bike hardly at all to like decent at it because you got way stronger, way more jacked. Our body just got better at the skill of it. Kind of similar with a movement. And again, like the more complex it is, the longer this period of time takes. So think like a barbell back squat, right? Where again, a little bit more skill heavy. First couple times we do it, we're going to be trash at it, right? But we will see like over time, like over those first couple of weeks that we do it, it's like, holy shit, every couple of weeks or every week, I'm able to add like 20, 30 pounds or add like 5 reps. You're able to see huge leaps in progress forward. And that is, again, our body just getting better at the skill and getting more efficient at the movement. Now we have to basically reach a certain level of proficiency before we actually see that stimulating muscle growth. So for a movement like a squat in the research, like a back squat, that can be like 10, 12 weeks before they actually see measurable muscle growth from that. Whereas like a more simple movement, like say a bicep curl, maybe it's like 3 to 6 weeks, but still like a decent amount of time. So the thing to understand there is if it's like every 3 to 4 weeks, I am changing almost all of my movements in my training, it'll always feel like you're getting way stronger, right? Because we're making those neurological gains. So again, it's like that week 1 to week 2 of the squat where, oh, wow, I added 20, 30 pounds. We're not ever actually building any muscle. So it's kind of it's a weird place to be because it seems like I'm always getting stronger. Whereas the reality is like you're training to build muscle. What it should feel like is it starts to get pretty damn hard for you to like add a rep or two or add a bit of load. And again, it's easy for most people to think of that as like, well, my body is like, I think that I need to switch things out because this is starting to get hard to progress. And doesn't that mean like I plateaued, I need a movement, where it's like, no, really, that's like what training should feel like. And this is like where we're just getting to the point where it's actually effective. So don't change things up too frequently. Keep a training logbook where we're focusing on noting like weights lifted, reps performed. And then the goal over time should be to, I would say, progress in a rep range. Like for most of our compound movements, I would say like, depending on the movement, maybe like 7 to 15 reps. For our isolation-esque movements, maybe more like 10 to 20 reps, focusing on getting stronger over time, adding reps or adding a bit of load here and there. It doesn't have to be crazy increases every week, but again, making sure we're pushing within a couple of reps shy of failure or less. And then over time, just focusing on getting stronger and stronger at those movements. If you like do those 3 things, you'll make a ton of progress.
Oh yeah, I love that. Yeah, because it's I have a few different questions that came up, but um, I always tell my clients like, hey, like if you want to develop your physique, build muscle, it's like learning a language. This may or
Yeah.
not be the best analogy, but I'm like, let's say you really want to learn Spanish, but then like 3 weeks in, you're like, kind of bored of Spanish. You kind of want to learn French. And you get like a little good at French. And then you're like, maybe Mandarin this week. Okay, let me go back to Spanish. It's like you're never going to get good at Spanish. You're never going to build on Spanish if you're fucking changing it up every time you're bored. Right? Now, I'm a lifestyle physique coach, so I feel like there's little things we can do to zhuzh it up. But I'll tell my
Yeah.
clients, hey, this is really the bread and butter to actually see the physique change that you're here for. Or else, like you said earlier, why would you be here? Like,
Yeah.
just go back to what you were doing and
And
freestyle on it. So,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that it's also important to understand like there's more ways to like quote unquote change it up and like keep your training engaging than just changing out movements, right?
right.
Where it's still like none of our clients either are just like robots where it's like, oh nope, I never want to change anything. Let's just rinse and repeat the same mesocycle for like 6 years straight. But it's like, hey, sometimes rather than if we're really tired of this or it's really getting to be a grind to progress this movement, but this still makes sense for our goals, maybe it is like, hey, can we change the rep range here a bit? Maybe we're like adding intensifiers here, right? So maybe we're adding like a drop set or something like that. Even things like potentially changing exercise order around a bit. But again, like ideally, like especially the movements that are most tied to your goals. And I would say that's a big variable there as well when it comes to like how much am I going to change things up with the client is like how important is this to the client's goals? I would say, especially with like lower body training, where we might have a relatively limited pool to pick from as far as like these are really going to be the movements that work super well for this client. We're like training her glutes well in a lengthened position. We get a great stimulus from them. So I'm going to be a lot more hesitant. Like if building glutes are a primary goal for her, I'm going to be a lot more hesitant to change one of those up versus like, hey, I'm really sick of this chest press variation. And it's like, do you care about getting jack packs? Not really. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Like I'm complete, so it's kind of on a scale there as well.
Mhm. I like that you brought that up too for those listening. Like it's a spectrum and everybody's goals are going to be different. I know the women listening to my podcast definitely want to like grow their glutes, build muscle, toned arms, which is really just muscle, right? All the things. That's going to come down to following that hypertrophy, those hypertrophy, which for those listening means muscle growth principles. And that's really what it comes down to. So listen to this back, jot those notes down, and make sure that your training is effective. You don't have a bunch of junk volume. I used to do that where I would go like online. I'll be like, okay, I need a hip thrust. I need a step up. Oh, this girl said RDLs are good. Okay, now I need glute kickbacks. And it's like you're trying to make this perfect glute cocktail workout when really it always comes down to the basics. Um, a squat movement, a hinge movement, maybe unilateral movement. I feel like an abduction. And am I missing anything? Hinge, squat,
I
maybe
think you nailed
unilateral,
it.
abduction. I feel like we're okay. And maybe an isolation to hit quads, glutes, whatever. I mean, hamstrings, whatever. Um, okay. Just a fire question because I get this all the time. Well, what if I just want to keep it in my head? Like, I'm going into the gym. Last time I did, 2 plates each side, hack squat. Next time I know that like my top side of my head, like, what would you say to someone who's just trying to keep everything in their head when it comes to their training? And they're like, kind of like, what's the importance around actually? We know that the importance is so that you can actually see your progressions. Like my top set for glute drive was 200 pounds for 6 reps. And I had 2 to 3 guns to my head left in the tank. And so I know where to push myself next time. But what would you say to the person who really wants to build their physique, their body, but they've been kind of keeping it in their head? Is there like a simplified way to track it? What would be your advice?
Honestly, I would just say, hey, it's not that hard to do. Just track it. Um,
I love it.
but really, I think in that instance, if it's from a coaching perspective, like we look over our clients' training logbooks consistently. So we're using this audit, how are we progressing as well. So like you're keeping it in your head, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I can't see what's going on in
Not
your
our
head.
clients. None of
Right. 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 But within that as well, from your end, it's going to be pretty damn hard to remember, okay, where were we at a month ago? Where were we at like 3 months ago? And how are we progressing? How are we like tracking our long-term progress? There may be times where like, hey, maybe I changed my rep range. So I dropped like the weight I was using pretty considerably. And it will be pretty hard for us to gauge, like, are we actually getting stronger? Because maybe I'm getting quite a lot stronger in this rep range. But when I go back from like 10 to 15 down to 7 to 10, do I remember where I was at before? And how do I know again if I've actually progressed relative to that or not? So like over a longer time frame, again, especially if you are changing some variables, again, like adding a drop set, changing your exercise order to where maybe you're doing a glute bridge before your RDL, whereas previously you weren't. So thus you aren't able to push quite as much load. You still get a good stimulus, but we're not able to push quite as much load. And then when we go back to like how we were doing things previously, can we actually measure like, okay, did that work for me? Did I actually get stronger now? Which again, like strength isn't going to be the only way to measure muscle growth. And it's not a perfect way to measure it, but it's probably like one of the best metrics we have, like getting stronger in the same rep range on the same movement over time. So like over longer time frames, it's going to again just make it very, very hard to tell. And I would say realistically, like if it's something where it's like, this is super important to me, I'm so annoyed that I haven't been able to make the progress I want, but it's just not very hard to do. You're resting between sets anyways. So just, I would say really, if it's that important to you, just do it. It'll very much like pay you back.
Absolutely. I love that. Just do it. It's not that fucking hard. So awesome. I do want to kind of ask about misconceptions. I know
Yeah.
that I want to ask about misconceptions and then just rapid fire questions and kind of wrap it up there. But what are the biggest misconceptions when it comes to changing your body composition as a woman? First thing that keeps popping into my head is cardio and like the level of importance of cardio, especially for a woman who maybe feel like, oh, my body type, I need more cardio or
Yeah.
something like that. So yeah, so what would be the biggest misconceptions when it comes to that? And yeah, let's start there.
No, absolutely. I think that again, we already really touched on what I would say is the biggest one is kind of a misunderstanding of how important training is
Right.
in order to like create the physique. Where truly, again, like still most women who start coaching with us are in this place where It's always thinking like, I just need to get leaner. I just need to get leaner to get the physique I want. Where it's like, hey, you're talking about like this shape that you want, this like shape of physique you want, that is quite a lot different than what you have due to the amount of muscle you have, or like rather that you don't have. So again, to get there, it's like building muscle is probably the most important part of this. And I think as a whole, it's still like kind of, and I'm not sure, like I think this is shifting quite a bit, but still is like very, very misunderstood as far as like how much building muscle is such a big part of getting the physique that at least most of the women we work with want. Again, it's not just like, I just need to get a little bit leaner and I'll be there. For most people, truly, it's like, hey, us adding muscle is just as important to get there as getting leaner. I think that's one of the biggest ones. Yeah, I would say like cardio as well. Again, just like a misunderstanding of how, but it kind of ties into that first point, right? Where like us just focusing on burning calories, investing a huge amount of time burning calories to try to get leaner. Again, like still isn't going to get us to where we want to be if we don't have as much muscle as we need to support that physique. I would say that's a very large one. I would say one I hear a little bit more frequently is kind of just like this very, like a shockingly young age to where, or as a whole, like how much does age impact this? Like I've had a decent amount of conversations lately with women who are like 40 to 42, where it's like, am I too old to do this? Is my body just like not going to respond? And it's like, well, I mean, first we can look at blood work. We can like sex hormones being in a good place will help. Yes. But even then, like, even if your sex hormones are trash and we've never been able to build much muscle, we can still add a decent bit of muscle. But I would say there does seem to be like a lot more, and I'm not sure why this is something that's coming up a lot more frequently lately, but again, a lot more like, hey, I'm in my early 40s. Do things just not work for me because I'm too old now? And like, no, absolutely not the case. But again, I think that it's like that's another pretty common one I see.
Yeah, I think that's like a conditioning. Like you hear your mom say, "Oh, I'm getting old. Watch when you get older, your body's going to change too." And even my mom, if you're listening to this, I love you. It's not your fault. But she would just be like, "Watch when you have kids." But now that I'm older, I'm like, "No, you just weren't hitting your protein and training." Like,
Yeah,
so obviously if you are keeping up with that stuff, it's only going to support you more. So maybe rewiring that story a little bit, stop blaming things on your age. Yes, there are things that affect it, right? However, I mean, there's plenty of 80-year-old women online that you can even see now that are like fit as fuck and they got fit last year, like a few years ago.
right.
Um, I like those misconceptions that you brought up. I think it ties into the training aspect that like the instead of focusing on like how much calories you're burning and how like sweaty you are and like how instead of turning all of your lifts into a cardio session, focus on quality repetitions, focus on quality over quantity, 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 go, 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 or ego lifting as well for my ladies listening who love to go heavy but we actually need to drop a little bit to get effective reps. It's kind of finding that happy median. I do want to ask you briefly, alcohol.
Yeah,
What is, because my clients, everybody's completely different. It depends on the phase that you're in. It depends on like your goals. I know for me, more than one drink a week will affect my recovery and progress significantly. And it really fucking sucks. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on alcohol? What's your approach to alcohol for someone who wants to build muscle, build their physique, but like they want to make it a lifestyle?
yeah. This is something where I also, like as coaches, I like to educate. Like, hey, here's the trade-offs of the decision we're making. But I never want to tell someone like this is right or wrong.
Right.
Personally, and it sounds like from you saying like this really fucking sucks. I think we might be in the same boat here. I love alcohol, and I wish that I could drink a lot more than I am able to, and still like support my goals because I truly like I really enjoy
It's refreshing to
alcohol.
hear.
Right? Yeah. No. So I can fully relate to that. My wife loves wine and margaritas, as do I as well. But again,
Yeah.
um, it's really just a conversation to have with clients around like, hey, here's the trade-offs we're making, and we need to understand like how this impacts your goals. So if the goal is building muscle, there are going to be a couple things that come into play here. So basically, building muscle comes down to largely muscle protein synthesis. So imagine your muscle is kind of like a brick wall. On one side of that brick wall, we have this dude named muscle protein synthesis who's adding bricks to the wall. On the other side of the wall, we have muscle protein breakdown. pulling bricks away from the wall. Now, there are a couple different things that we can do to like kind of speed up the rates at which usually these guys are working. So like us training, that increases muscle protein synthesis. A decent sized bolus of protein in a meal increases muscle protein synthesis. Now, at the end of any given time frame, for us to build muscle tissue, we need that rate of muscle protein synthesis to be greater than muscle protein breakdown. This is also why something like PEDs, like steroids, help people build muscle, largely because they increase that rate of muscle protein synthesis very, very consistently. But anyways, when it comes to alcohol, first, that does blunt muscle protein synthesis depending on the amount. Like the amount that we consume will also really impact like how largely that is impacted. So that's one variable where, hey, it will hurt our ability to kind of recover and build new muscle tissue, but also it will disrupt sleep. Now, for some people, it may feel like, hey, like me drinking actually helps me fall asleep, which it can, like help improve our ability to fall asleep quicker, but it will hurt our sleep quality, which in turn will again hurt our recovery and our ability to build new muscle tissue. If it's like the next day when I'm going to my training, I feel like a little bit beat up, I feel a little bit more run down. Probably like a lot more common if we drank a bit more the night before. Also will dehydrate us, which again, like even being slightly dehydrated can hurt training performance. So making sure that we at the very least accounted for that. But I really think that for most people, it's just a conversation around, okay, here's the potential trade-offs we're choosing. And how are you feeling about your rate of progress? Right. Where I had a lot of ongoing conversations with this with one client specifically relatively recently, where it would be a like, man, I'm so frustrated because every Saturday morning in my training session, I just feel like shit. And that's like my leg press day, like this movement we're really focusing on progressing. But it was okay, every Friday night, hey, we have like these 4 or 5 glasses of wine. This is gonna hurt our sleep. This is gonna hurt like us. This is gonna have a big impact on us going into the next training session. So
Right.
I mean, we could first, I think for her, we actually ended up moving around exercise order a bit to where like the session, because that wasn't something she was willing, that wasn't a trade off she was willing to make or like give that up. So we just changed around her training a bit to where it was like, hey, an upper body day that's less of a priority here. But it's really just a conversation around, okay, are we okay with the way this impacts our progress? And I mean, also, you have to understand that an alcohol is mostly, we think of the macros as protein, carbs, fat, but there's also technically a fourth macro, ethanol, which is going to be primarily what alcohol is composed of. And our body can't use that to do things like synthesize new hormones or build new muscle tissue. Whereas again, like those proteins, carbs that you're taking in would be used to again help drive along recovery more, build new muscle tissue. So if it's like, hey, I'm trading a decent amount of my calories consistently like 3-4 times a week for alcohol, this may also still be hurting, like alongside everything else I mentioned, also may be hurting our ability to build new muscle. So it's really, I think for most clients, just a conversation around how are we feeling about our progress? Are we happy with this? If this is something we're kind of hesitant to change or pull back on, are there any other levers we can pull here, right? Like, I don't know, our peri-workout nutrition, things of that nature. But it kind of comes to a point where it's, okay, we've identified this might be the bottleneck for us to see further progress. Are you willing to change that? Or are you willing to accept that? And then there's no right or wrong there, but that's typically kind of how we'll address that.
Right. I like that. It's like you're choosing it, right? It's not
Yeah.
like, oh, I don't know why I'm not making progress, you
Yeah.
know? And
And
yeah,
I'm definitely not anti-alcohol,
yeah,
but
me neither. I would
it's
agree.
just important to be aware of.
Definitely important. And even evaluating like relationship with alcohol too. Like if because I used to be a huge party girl and I feel like it's developed over time to be more normal, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
I mean, I am 26, so I don't know who in their early 20s wasn't a party person.
Right.
But I do think that for me, like it was like an escape, like to a point. And I think even evaluating like what would make the difference between 2 drinks and 6, 7, 8, right? Like what would really be the difference for me? Am I just doing it because environmental? Am I truly desiring it? And kind of seeing what that looks like for you. Um, and so, yeah, Jeremiah, you've added a lot of value for today. And I have one more question that I wanted to ask because it keeps popping up in my head around Pilates. I love Pilates. I integrate it with my strength training routine. A lot of our clients will integrate it into their routine because I'm trying to support them and like, you don't need to, you see it on TikTok and now you want to this and that. Can you explain to someone who is on TikTok and they see a girl who's like, "Oh, I switched from tracking my macros and strength training and, this and I was super puffy and inflamed and bulky. And now I do Pilates and now I'm like skinny, mini, lean. I can possibly, I don't know if you've seen that. Have you
Is
seen
it
that?
no? I'm honestly not really on TikTok. Is that a thing?
Oh yeah, it's like a whole thing. Like it's like, oh, I switched from strength training to Pilates and now look how lean I am. And what I'm thinking is like her recovery probably wasn't in the good place. You know, you're probably going ham in the gym and not properly recovering, which is causing inflammation, causing you to feel bulky or whatever, and then you switch to something less. And that's kind of what I'm thinking. But maybe because you're not as familiar with it, I guess uh what would be your advice to someone who's like wants to train but there's still kind of this fear of like I'm going to turn into a big old man, like I'm just like I want to train hard but I just see myself literally becoming the Hulk.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. So I mean, I can speak to the Pilates thing a little bit first, where what I would say there is I think it is so important to look at there's probably a lot of other variables that went into, like if you truly are seeing like first again, like are we actually seeing the before and afters? Are we actually seeing like, hey, this person's physique did change and much more in alignment with what I want? But also, again, there's like if it's like, hey, this person's body composition improved, I would say, especially if it was like this person built more muscle from Pilates. Again, unless we're very, very new to, like, incredibly new to like any type of muscular stressor, for lack of better terms, like again, like that theory of effective reps, Pilates will feel hard, it will feel challenging, but we're probably not going to build a lot of muscle from something like Pilates. So, I mean, comparing that to like the resistance training, if it was like this person built more muscle than what they were doing there, their approach to training, I would say, was probably just pretty shitty before. Or as you said, like
Right.
maybe there was just this huge disparity between how hard they were training and their ability to recover. But honestly, don't think that's like all that common. Um,
Yeah.
so again, like we would also need to look at like, hey, what did their training actually look like before? And could we actually say, or like, could we actually make any valid argument that like if the goal is to build muscle, that you doing this Pilates session would be more effective than like hypertrophy training and doing so in a proper manner? It would be like, we couldn't, right?
Yeah.
So I think that it's, again, like a lot of times there's so much context that is left out of that,
Yeah.
that I think that's really a very, very important variable. I mean, and could also be like, even if we were in a place where like, hey, maybe I was like under so much stress, maybe my digestion, my gut health, maybe even hormonally, I wasn't in a good place then. And like, this is kind of me transitioning to like a more Zen state of life. I'm the Pilates girl now, right? And that in itself could be like, we have to look at all the other variables there. Okay, so then to speak to like, I'm afraid to get bulky. There I kind of look at this as like the cool thing about building muscle is, first, we can be very specific with where you do add muscle tissue, right? So the thing is, if at any point you get to like, hey, this specific muscle group, I don't want to grow anymore. Cool. Okay, we'll pull back on the amount of volume there. We can maybe just keep that as maintenance volume, basically the number of hard sets we need to just maintain there per week. Or even like if you want to shrink that area a little bit, you actually truly don't want to get more jacked here. Cool, we can pull it back. Now, it's incredibly rare. Like I actually can't think of any clients I've ever worked with who have actually gotten to the point where it's like, oh, I have too much muscle here. But again, like it does come up. So that's the first thing to understand, is we can be very specific with where we add muscle tissue. And then alongside that, I always kind of say it's kind of like getting run over by a giant turtle. Like you, like this fear of like, I just accidentally got super jacked. It's like imagine there's just like this giant turtle way off in the distance. So you're like, oh no, look at that giant turtle coming towards us. I hope it doesn't run me over. And then like 3 years later, it actually like hits you, right? You will see it coming for a very, very, very long time, because muscle growth is such a slow process. Like it takes years and years and years of intentionally trying to get super jacked in order to get there. And like some people I still haven't gotten there. I've been trying to for a very long time, right? So it's something that, unless you just have incredible genetics, and at that point, you'll know already, like you'll already have a good amount of muscle, and then we can just be strategic with where we add new muscle tissue to your frame. But otherwise, you will have, like, when you get to the point where it's like, hey, I'm good, I feel good here, I don't want to add anymore. It won't be like, oh shit, but I actually did another workout and now I'm way too swollen, now I can't go back, right? It'll be something you'll see it coming for a very, very long time. So it's really just not anything to be too worried about. And also, ultimately, if you did get to the point where it's like, I think I took it too far, I think I am too jacked, you could just stop training and you would lose the muscle. And again, it would be fine. So I don't
Absolutely.
know. It's a conversation that does still come up pretty frequently, I would say, but it's really
Yeah.
just not. It's incredibly rare to like work with someone who, once they get into it, is ever like satisfied with the amount of muscle they have and doesn't want to build more.
Right. 100%. And especially like arms, upper body, that is the key there. So
Absolutely.
that's super, super helpful. I loved today's podcast. And I definitely know that it's going to add a lot of value, especially in training, especially in just like wiping misconceptions around that. I hear, a lot of women, they'll be like, well, I'm not a bodybuilder. I don't know why I have to like be so strategic. And it's like, well, you might not be competing, but if you want to build your body, you kind of are in a way. Like you kind of are choosing to be a bodybuilder in some way, shape, or form. Even if you're trying to build habits, make it a lifestyle, all the fun, shiny things that we all want.
Yeah.
So, is there any last remarks, any last words, any last remarks you want to
Um,
share? Anything coming up for you that you think women need to know when it comes to building their physique?
I think that last point you made was honestly a really good one, and that was one I was going to jump in on anyways. Where I do think on social media there is a lot presented as like, hey, if you want like a different physique, you want better results, you don't need to change anything. All you need to do is pay me, and you will get like we'll crush it, right? Like you'll get everything you want. All you need to do is just hire me as your coach. And there's a lot of like especially like the like I hopefully I don't like I never want to like offend anyone if this is like part of their like what they're putting out there, and I understand the intention behind it, but I think it's misconstrued. A lot of coaches with the like, um, I help whoever lose X amount of weight without giving up their favorite foods, right? Like, and
Uh-huh.
again, it's not that we have to like
Right.
stop eating our favorite foods or anything of the sort, but a lot
Right.
of times these things get misconstrued as basically what I do is I just take how I'm eating right now, also like the aspects of my training that I like don't want to change. I just don't change, but I pay someone and I
Mhm.
get the result. Where really like the reality of it is, it typically does require us changing a decent amount if you want considerable change from where you're at, right? So if we're not happy with where we
Mhm.
are, it's just important to understand that we do want to see like large deviations, large changes from where we're at currently. It also typically will require a pretty large change in the way we approach our training, the way we approach our nutrition. And it's
Right.
not like
It's not a dig because I will actually say like not too long ago, I coach tracking your macros and I come
yeah,
from a if it fits your macros and got too fucking bloated. So then I had to learn about gut health and actually
yeah,
like making the foods that nourish my body. But even for my clients, they would transition to a deficit from kind of like their builds, they're incorporating foods they love. And then it's like, we're not making progress. We need to
yeah,
dial in. But it's almost like they've been conditioned like balance, freedom, and yee, yippee. And it's like, no, like there's actually going to be seasons of life like where you need to lock in. And
right.
balance is probably going to have to take a back seat for a little bit for us to really make the physique change that you're looking for. But the reward is so much better. And eventually, yes, you can get to the place where you can eat a little bit more intuitive. I call it structured intuitive eating, and be able to maintain that. And, you know, that's really what it's going to get to. I think a lot of times we want to skip to that place, right? Maybe we see our favorite influencer online. She has glutes and, the tummy and the arms, and she's like drinking on the weekends and having, I don't fucking know, macaroni and cheese and whatever. And you're like, oh, I want to get there. But you have to understand that she went through phases of like seasons of like being on her shit and balance having to take a little bit of a back seat for a little, and that's just what it is. And it actually tastes so much better when you get to that place, because you actually worked for it. You weren't just trying to get there, not giving up anything at all. So I'm glad that you brought
Absolutely.
that up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I mean, again, like I don't want this to sound negative or anything of the sort, but I think it's an interesting thing because I do see a lot of like, hey, this is how, like, from like a coaching perspective, especially like leaning more towards the influencer side of things, where there's a lot more like, this is what I do right now to have the physique I have. And it's like, I only like, I only ended up training like once or twice this week. That's okay. or like I haven't tracked my macros for the last like 3 to 6 months, right? And I just maintain here. And it kind of paints a picture that, hey, someone who's brand new to this should be able to do the same thing and get the same result. Where the reality is, like, that person to get there probably did put in a lot of time, where they were very, very, very focused on this. They were probably dialed in on tracking their food. They weren't missing training sessions, right? And then like once you get there, it's easier to maintain. But I think like, again, that's just something that often gets misconstrued. So it's just important to consider if you're like absorbing content like that.
Yeah. Like I always tell my girls, use discernment. Like, don't just absorb, absorb, absorb. Like, just be able to discern. Like, if someone's saying like, "Oh, like been eating intuitively and like did XYZ," you gotta have context. And 9 times out of 10, they either had a sick genetic standpoint where they could just, have a little bit of protein and carbs, and their body's like, hell yeah, or they actually went through those phases and now they're in this place, and this is what gets the most engagement, because honestly the work doesn't get the most engagement.
That's very true.
So yeah, I'm glad you agree. And thank you again, Jeremiah, for coming today. Of course, if you guys want to connect with Coach Jeremiah, learn a little bit more, I'm going to drop his Instagram in the show notes. And you can follow him at Jeremiah Bair, Bair for the last name. And I'll drop like his podcast, which again, such an amazing podcast. If you want to really dive deep on like the science, if you just want to binge content around that, definitely listen to his podcast below, because you guys know mine can fluctuate between different things. I'm gonna go ahead and take it from there. Thanks,
Perfect. Thank you for
guys.
having me.
Of course.